There is a lot of confusion in our society about what a man is. There really is a crisis. And I guess what should we expect with literally decades of men being marginalized and ridiculed and put down and ignored? But when I come here, you're like an oasis in the desert. I look at you men, and I'm just grateful for the example that you have set. It's wonderful to see the generations here. You fellas that are a little bit older than me, the integrity of your lives, and then I see your children here, and I see your grandchildren here, and that doesn't just happen. Because of the prayer and the walking with God and showing them the way. When I look at these teenagers and these children, my heart as a pastor is just thrilled. It really is. And I think of these who are in their teen years now and recently graduated. I mean, I know they're not perfect. They don't walk on water. I know they have struggles, but I'll tell you, a finer group of young men and women sitting back there and sitting over there, I have yet to meet. I'm just so proud of you. I really am. The young men and women that you're becoming, and it goes back to mom and dad. It really does. And a lot of the guys who are in prison, about 90% of them come from single parent families. And it's not that there's something wrong with mom, it's just that it takes two. That's the way God designed it. He knew what he was doing when he designed and created the family. A husband, father who's a male, and a wife, mother who is a female, together raising their children. And I look at you guys, and I am so proud of you and you men. I'm proud to call myself your pastor, and I'm proud to be your friend. The godly example that you set and the integrity of your lives, and may he richly bless you. We have, as a token of our appreciation, we have these gift bags here. Please take one after the service this morning. It's just a way of sharing, giving, just a token of our appreciation for who you are. I'm going to be reading out of Genesis 39. I'm not going to read all two chapters, 39 and 40, okay? But these two chapters cover a period of 11 years. But even though it covers 11 years, there are only two major incidents that it highlights in Joseph's life. I'm not going to touch on these incidents so much because you can and you should read about them yourself. And it's also, I'm not touching on them per se because it's not so much the incidents that matter as what really matters is how Joseph responded and what it shows about him as a young man and what you and I can draw from that as men and women at any age. Paul Harvey used to say, you can tell when you're on the road to success. It's uphill all the way. And at some point in his youth, God had given Joseph those two dreams that indicated that God was going to bless him and prosper him and do great things through him. And coupled with his deep faith, he knew that he was destined for greatness. But when you look at his life, where he is in Genesis 39 and 40, it appears that Joseph should have been like Bugs Bunny. He should have twined left at Albuquerque because it looked like he's going the wrong way. Up to this point and for the next 2 years after what happens in Genesis 39 and 40, he will have spent his entire adult life in prison or as a slave. Along the way, he encounters a moral crisis which worsens his situation. How does he weather this 13-year storm so that he emerges whole, intact, and able to see the fulfillment of God's plan for his life? There are 3 verses in chapter 39 that are key to this portion of Joseph's life, and I want to share those with you. Chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. Then down to verse 23. The keeper of the prison paid no attention, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Then in verse 23, the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. That phrase, the Lord was with Joseph. And you know, there are many ways in which God is with a person. It's not always with external circumstances. Sometimes we say, well, I know that it was the Lord because this door opened or this door closed. And yes, he works that way, but it's not always in a visible sign. God is with us when he gives us a noble thought, an uplifting heart, a key idea, giving us the right word to say at a key moment. Or maybe in the case of my wife's husband, the strength to keep his mouth shut when it would have been a bad thing to open it. And God's with us when resources or people just suddenly appear out of nowhere. But there's something else we need to see here. In verse 2, that phrase, depending on the version you're reading, it says, he became a successful man. And in verse 23, whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Now think about that for a moment. And how we define success in our society. Joseph was neither rich, nor powerful, nor famous, nor free. He was none of those things. Yet God said this man was a success. The King James says that he was prosperous. Bought and sold like merchandise, the property of another man, cut off from his father and home. How can that be considered successful and prosperous? That's not how you and I view that today. But God called him successful. I would suggest that there are difficulties that cannot impair prosperity, and there is a prosperity that dominates and overcomes over all external circumstances. When we live solely in our circumstances, when we allow the situation to define who we are, we can never be prosperous, no matter how much money we have in our accounts. You all right out there? You hear me? How can this man be deemed successful and prosperous? It was because this man is deeper than the slave, making him greater than his external situation. What were the keys to this prosperity in this man's life? I think, first of all, his faith. His faith. Joseph had an unshakable conviction in the sovereignty of God. Yes, his situation was lousy. He had been sold as a slave and lived in another country. He belonged to another person, but he did not give in to self-pity or discouragement. He might have felt sorry for himself. I'm sure there were days he felt lonely and discouraged, but he did not allow these things to swallow him up and consume him. He did not give up on tomorrow simply because he did not understand today. In his words to the cupbearer and to the baker, he demonstrated that the answers to life come from the Lord, and it is God's plan that will prevail. Now, to this point in his life, he couldn't really see or understand why God had allowed all of this. He did later, but at this point he has these dreams, and everything after that goes sideways. But he didn't become cynical, and he didn't become embittered, and he did not stop trusting God. He had faith. The second thing that he had is he had integrity. Joseph's faith in God translated into faithfulness to God. This handsome young man, highly successful, highly visible, became highly vulnerable. Day after day, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph. How did he resist? I think when we look at how Joseph handled the situation, we can apply that to any type of situation, not just sexual temptation. First of all, he had a clear understanding of what sin was, and he had a deep revulsion and hatred toward it. He was committed to the principle of being a righteous person before God. He would not violate God's law. Second, he clearly stated his position. There was no doubting as to where he stood on this issue, and he did not waffle. Third, he flatly rejected the proposal. There was no hesitation, there was no rationalization, no mulling it over, there was no room for discussion or debate. Fourth, he was careful and did everything in his power to avoid compromising positions and being alone with her. And then fifth, when all else failed, he ran. He ran. New Testament tells us to flee temptation. There is a time to run. When she literally tried to use force with Joseph, he cut and ran. Now, from the text, when you read this passage about where she yanks his robe off of him, I don't know if he left the house naked as a jaybird or if he had his underwear on. I don't know. But what's striking here is Joseph didn't care about how he looked. He didn't care about what she said. He didn't care about what others may have thought when they saw him run. He was not the least bit concerned about his dignity. He maintained the integrity of his character, and he put his reputation in God's hands. And so must we. Young people, I want to speak to you for a moment. So please listen. There are going to be times, especially those of you who are not driving yet, there are going to be times where you find yourself in a situation, whether it's on a date or you go to a party and you accept the invitation on that date or to that party because you have a particular, in your mind, you have a particular picture of how that's going to go. And you get there and you find the situation is turned, and you find yourself in a situation when your integrity is you're being asked to compromise your integrity and do something that you know that's not wrong. You know is wrong. When you find yourself in that situation, call your parents. Call your parents. Don't worry about what your classmates may think of you. This is the time where you don't worry about your reputation, you worry about your character. Right. If your parents aren't available, call another adult that you know. If you can't reach them, sorry I didn't talk about this with you ahead of time, call Tracy and me. Get yourself out of that situation. I used to tell the teenagers that when I was at Lancaster. If you can't get a hold of your parents or you're afraid to call your parents, you call me. We'll come get you. Don't worry about your reputation. God will take care of that. Amen. Worry about your character. Notice that Joseph went to prison. Potiphar could have had him put to death. But I think that Joseph lived such an exemplary life that I don't think Potiphar believed his wife, even though the evidence seemed to indicate that Joseph was guilty. Again, guard your character. God will take care of your reputation. Amen. And then humility. When Joseph was younger, he was arrogant. He was presumptuous. He was self-righteous. And because of that, he stimulated hatred in his own family. His brothers wanted to kill him. Man, I can't imagine that. How awful that must have been. While no prayers are recorded in his journey to Egypt, I have no doubting that he prayed, because when he arrives in Egypt at Potiphar's house, he's a changed man. He's no longer brash. He makes no demands for special status. He worked hard and he earned his keep. Every day he displayed loyalty, reliability, dependability. He was the son of a rich man, and yet no job was beneath him. How did Potiphar and the prison warden know that God was with Joseph? Did Joseph preach? Did he hand out religious tracts? Did he organize gatherings? Did he post religious sayings on his cell wall? No. They knew that God was with him because God blessed him because of his work ethic and his character. When the cupbearer and the baker asked Joseph to interpret their dreams, Joseph could have said, "Hey, I got this. I can tell you. I know the answers." He could have tried to use it as an opportunity for self-promotion and to change his situation, but he doesn't. He witnesses to the truth that God gives the interpretation of dreams and that he controls the affairs and destinies of men. He gives credit where it's due, and he leaves the results with God, which meant that he spent 2 more years in prison. But he trusted God in his situation. I want to say this too. I forgot this. I didn't have it in my notes, but I want to say this too. Joseph was prosperous and successful because the man was greater than the slave. And I want to say something to you men. The way God has created us, we like to work, to accomplish. There's something within us that we need to do that. But sometimes we tend to take that too far. And we look at ourselves as our job. We are what we do. And I just want to encourage you that you are so much more than that. You're more than your paycheck. You're more than your position. You're more than the place in your company. A lot of guys, when they retire, they lose their way because they've lost their identity in who they are. And I just want to encourage you fellas that it's not your job title or where you are on the seniority list. It's not your paycheck or the size of your 401k. You are much more than that. You are much greater than that. So don't sell yourself short. When we're young, we have dreams, we have aspirations, and for many of us, those things don't come true. And to a certain extent, we have to settle where we are in life. And sometimes we look at where we are and we cause that to reflect upon ourselves. Don't fall into that trap. Wherever you are, if you've got Jesus, you're a winner in God's sight. Amen. You are a success. You are a prosperous man. And I can tell this group of men the legacy that you are leaving in your children and your grandchildren is going to echo through eternity. You're winners. and God values you. Joseph was an innocent man who suffered at the hands of sinful, devious people. To this point in his life, nothing is what he originally envisioned. He could have been bitter. He could have been questioning whether or not God was good or just. Perhaps he could have thrown his faith away altogether. Instead, he chooses to bloom where he's planted. And he cultivates his faith and his integrity and humility, which bear the fruit of his future success, true success in the way that God measures it. The best definition I have heard of success is knowing the will of God and doing it. And you do. Keep at it. Keep at it. Let's stand together.